Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. This is Chris Sass, your host, with me co-host Johan Oberg. What's happening today, Johan?
Hey, Chris. Great to be on. Another great week. Coming into the fall, you can sense it in the air, and we've been talking on the show for quite a bit. Once we get into the fall, what will happen with the energy markets and what will happen with the supply? So I think we got the first couple of weeks here now. We're starting to see a little bit. How you been doing?
The irony is I'm sitting in Houston, Texas with my air conditioning running right now. So it doesn't feel like fall here. It's beautiful, hot and sunny. So coming from Switzerland down to Houston for meetings, it definitely was, it doesn't feel like fall at the moment. But I'm super excited. We have a guest. Actually, I tried to interview him when we were last week in London. We had an interview, but the recording didn't go well. So we decided to do it recorded as opposed to the live interview from ETOT. We're going to talk to a guest about hydrogen today, and he's from Engie, and we had a great conversation about hydrogen, and we're going to try to relive that. But fortunately, you get to join now because we're not doing it recorded anymore.
Which is great, and I missed the traveling. We missed eWorld this year, and I missed Commodity Week, and now you're in Houston. I need to start picking up on going to these events as well. But I'm glad I can be on here today.
Well, I'm in Houston. I'm planning for our live event, October 28th, where we have that live student event at Energy Trading Week in Houston. It's going to be an amazing event. We expect about 100 students from the Houston area to be there, so it should be exciting. But let's focus on today's content because I think we have a fantastic interview coming up. I'd like to bring Eric Gosseye to the program. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Johan. I'm glad to be there.
So I do apologize for mispronouncing your company name because I saw your eyes roll when I said that, and I know we had this conversation last time. But what I'm going to allow you to do is introduce yourself so you don't have any mispronunciations, and maybe tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Eric Gosseye. I'm working in Engie, for Engie in Brussels. I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a master in engineering. I did about 10 years as a project manager in the energy sector for a large-scale project for tractable engineering. Following this, I did an entrepreneurship, I think it's the right pronunciation in English, in Engie. It means launching an innovative idea inside Engie, a company I was working for with a bunch of colleagues in the hydrogen sector, in the sustainable and low carbon hydrogen sector. So this was about 6 years ago. And this, with a master in management that I completed about the same time, offered me a bridge to go to the asset side of Engie, meaning the side of Engie developing this exciting future, large-scale, sustainable hydrogen production that's all the hype about in the energy sector for diversification of supply in Europe and other reasons, and decarbonization. So it's about 6 years now I'm working on this. First, I was as what we call an architect. That means we are really defined for our business developers the best way to answer the need of a potential client from the supply of electricity down the value chain, really down the value chain until the delivery to the client, which could be heavy duty, which could be an industrial, which could be energy sector. So it's really exciting to do all the value chain and check after the costing and also the valorization of these projects. Very recently, I moved to developing partnership with large industrial partners for making this project happen faster and more efficiently. So I'm still in Engie.
So I'm excited to talk about hydrogen. One of the things you said in your introduction just a second ago that raised a red flag is you said, it's kind of like the hype or it's early. So I guess to start the conversation, we're talking hydrogen. Where is hydrogen today from your perspective and your organization's perspective? What's real? And I'm talking green hydrogen, I suppose, when I say where is hydrogen, because hydrogen's been around a long time. But where is green hydrogen today?
Green hydrogen is just on the brink of passing a threshold, the threshold that solars went through in the early 2000s. When I entered the field in 2016 in Engie, it was more of a hype. It was a consensus understanding that we have to go that way to green the hydrogen and to use hydrogen to replace to replace a lot of hydrocarbon usage, because you can't do everything with electricity, with direct electrification. It's just not possible. And so Engie was one of the first on the ball. So we started at that time to study the ecosystem, evaluate the value chain, develop for large-scale industrial production. I don't speak for small-scale production. To evaluate the technologies that we would have to invest, which way in the world we should produce, where, how to transport it. But the problem, for taking off was really the competitiveness with fossil fuel and the will of the society to go that way, to really decarbonize and make an effort for that. Because like I always say, between picking an apple on a tree, which is like pumping oil from the ground, it's not the same than growing the tree yourself. And it does be that way we have to go for the sustainable hydrogen industry. So it's obviously much more work, and it's at the beginning, at least, more expensive. So now we are passing a threshold, since there is this IRA, which is voted in the US. I don't know if you heard about it, the Inflation Reduction Act, which will give a huge boost to sustainable hydrogen by creating a nearly level playing field with fossil hydrogen. So you have a de facto market now. And you don't have to talk about anymore so much about competitiveness with fossil hydrogen. You have to talk about competitiveness between the different sustainable hydrogen, which are blue, gray, green, all the colors of the rainbow. And also in Europe, we have this RED II Act, Renewable Energy Directive, which should create not an incentive to produce, as the IRA is, which is production tax credit, meaning it incentivizes you by giving you money when you produce sustainable hydrogen. In Europe, we take the other way. We take the quota way. It means we really create a market for sustainable hydrogen, which only sustainable hydrogen can fulfill. And that's two ways to create a market. But that means that now we are really the threshold. It's nearly signed, where sustainable hydrogen will have its market of its own.
So the Reduction Act in the United States, I think, is about a $9 billion investment over time by the U.S. government, if I recall. And so one of the things, we've had other hydrogen guests on the show, we've talked hydrogen before, is the cost of hydrogen needs to come down, right? So renewables work well when they make business sense. The doing it just because, and especially if you look at the current economy and where people are, doesn't seem to make sense. So are these incentives enough to actually get these projects, shovel-ready projects going at this point? Are you seeing that in your organization? Are you seeing projects that are really moving now that weren't moving just weeks ago?
Yes, we are. Yes, clearly, it changed the mindset of the investors. So in our organization, we have Engie is a worldwide industry, if I may. So it's we have 4 branches: we have renewable power production, and then we have the consulting branch, with the engineering I'm coming from initially. Then we have the branch which is the asset, which is electricity line, gas pipeline, and then we have the large centralized production assets, which is the branch I'm now, which is this development of large-scale industrial production of sustainable hydrogen, but also there was the gas power plants, batteries, battery systems, desalination. So we've seen all this hydrogen, this pipeline worldwide of hydrogen production, which was kind of developing, but it was hard to sign, because the customer was always like, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a market behind. I don't know how much I can valorize this green hydrogen. Regulation is a moving target, so you anyway can sign a business model for 15 years if you don't know where you put your feet. So you need the regulation to be clear on it, and this has been moving target until now. Really, this IRA is a changing factor, and the RED II, there's still some discussion, but hopefully beginning next year should be finalized. The European Parliament made a vote to push it in the right direction in a much more efficient way. So yes, now we really see the focus changing in region, but also the industry willingness to go forward. And also I think the very harsh summer we had this last year or two also make a change in the public opinion. because you speak about the 9 billion. Is it enough? Well, a rule of thumb, not Engie numbers, but the usual consulting numbers, it's that you need for 1 megawatt of electrolysis, you need $1 million. So 1 gigawatt of electrolysis, you need 1 billion. If you see that the target in Europe is to have 40 gigawatt by 2030, that means that this 9 billion can already cover 25% of the cost of this 40 gigawatts. So you imagine it's really a huge incentive. It means that 1/4 of your business model is already covered. We see also industry ready to pay premium for the airlines, and others are really coming and saying, yeah, we need green fuel. Our customers are now, the mindset changed. The customer, mainly the corporate customers, are really ready to pay for this green fuel, even if it's more expensive, even if it's 3, 4, 5 times more expensive, depending the production routes, they are ready. So yes, the mindset definitely changed.
So a quick question there, Eric. If I look at sustainable hydrogen versus green, can you just help me to kind of clarify what we're talking about here when we talk about sustainable? Because there seems to be slightly different in vocabulary. What is actually green, what is actually sustainable, and what is not? So if you can help me just kind of explore a little bit on that.
I'll try to be simple, because actually these naming conventions are not already not already carved in marble. It's moving targets also due to regulation. Basically sustainable means having the impact on greenhouse gas emission, but also all what's around, like land use, the food chain, and all that is reduced. Very reduced and sustainable, something we can sustain on a long term, meaning decades. Yeah. While green is usually restricted to hydrogen produced by electrolysis, meaning splitting water molecule using electricity from renewable energy. That means running on this intermittent, cheap intermittent renewable energy to split the water molecule through electrolysis, which is a process where you have like a huge stack of electrolysis. Yeah. Just, to produce this hydrogen and oxygen. And so there is different color: green, renewable electricity. We speak sometimes about pink, which means nuclear electricity, which is also very low in CO2 emissions. You have blue. Some people speak about blue, which means actually you use the usual technology of splitting methane, natural gas, so a fossil fuel, but you capture the CO2 and you inject it back into the ground to hopefully store it there for the centuries to come. And that is blue. So this is a whole rainbow. Yeah. You more or less all qualify them as sustainable.
Because I read an article in CNBC a while ago, and when I was looking at this, there was this plant in Shell in Canada that ran a kind of a carbon capture hydrogen production, and they did some research on it, and they were actually, if I'm not mistaken, or if I read the article right, that they're actually emitted more greenhouse gas than they actually captured when they worked on this. So that surprised me a little bit in terms of, okay, we invest in all of this, but is it actually working? The one thing, the green, I can understand, but the rest that's kind of a way of just moving the needle a little bit. Is it enough, or is green the way forward?
I could be seen as slightly partial on that question, because I'm working for Engie. Engie, we target only hydrogen based on electrolysis, using either renewable, pure renewable, either low carbon electricity. That means, we're open to trade blue hydrogen, but we don't want to produce it.
Okay.
Yes, there is a risk with blue hydrogen in the world, because there is methane slip when you slippage when you extract the natural gas. So you have some methane leaks, and this is a very powerful greenhouse gas emission. Then you have the capture of the CO2. You break the methane in the furnace. And usually there, part of the CO2 is not captured. The part of the CO2 which are used, of the natural gas which is used to heat the furnace, produce very diluted CO2 at the outlet. And this part is usually, we don't we see that industry don't foresee to capture that one, or if they want to capture it, it's not 100% of it because it's very diluted and it's very expensive to capture. So usually they capture more the process part, meaning the methane, that is the CO2 which come from the cracking, not from the heating. So it's a bit technical, sorry. So
No,
yes, could emit still CO2, and often this CO2 is also used for enhanced oil recovery, meaning pushing more oil from the ground. And is it really capture if you use it to push more oil off the ground? This is a moral question. And as I said, I can be passionate on the question.
So I don't want to debate the color coded and how green the hydrogen is, because I think there is a use for hydrogen, right? What would be interesting from your perspective, where is hydrogen going to be used? Where are you seeing it being used? What are the early movers of where it's going, and where does it fit well into our strategy? So what I heard you say early in the interview was electrification. Yeah, that's part of the strategy, but it's not the whole solution. And you said, okay, so I need some sort of molecule, perhaps, is what my translation is to do things. So hydrogen in the case of this conversation. So where do we use it?
Hydrogen is already widely used. So at least replacing today's hydrogen usage is not possible with direct electrification, because you use it for chemical. So you can't create plastic out of electricity. So yes, by electrolysis and producing hydrogen, but in other way, no. So so hydrogen is already a strong base chemical for all the hydrocarbon, plastic, and other compounds. So it's used in refinery for sure to create today's fuel, to crack the heavy molecule to make lighter molecule, which are better fuel. So this part can be partly replaced by electrification. So electrification makes a lot of sense for a lot of application, like low-grade heat, meaning 100 degree or a bit more. It makes for very high-grade heat, like 1,000 degree and more, and electrification have its limits. So again, we fell back on renewable fuel. That means hydrogen. This is the base molecule for fuel. Then you have the mobility. Mobility, for sure, light mobility, batteries will do the job. For sure, your car will do perfectly the job. For heavy duty mobility, on the other hand, it's not only the cost of the efficiency of the fuel which counts, it's also the time to refuel, and that hydrogen is much faster, or hydrocarbons built from sustainable hydrogen. It's much more efficient in refueling time. In power density, it's much more efficient. That means aviation, for example, will probably never take off on something else than kerosene or similar molecule. For short haul, yes, there is options for individual plane, for short hop on, hop off. That could be maybe on batteries or liquid hydrogen we are looking. But kerosene will remain for a medium to long haul flight. For heavy duty usage, like train pusher, where the line is not electrified, for heavy duty trucks who have to do 2,000 kilometers with a heavy payload. Again, hydrogen probably will be unbeatable, or at least not by electricity. So that's where we see hydrogen taking off mostly. It's very early niche market for sustainable chemicals, sustainable green steel, SAF, aviation fuels, the usual suspects, kind of with premium products, but requiring hydrogen, and where quota are imposed, or the IRA will be working in the US, because that's okay for the sector. But that's where we see it.
Do you have projects you're currently working on or do you have test beds or things that you're currently doing in this space today?
Engie have several projects we're working on, and which are public. We have this project of producing kerosene in France, based on water electrolysis and carbon capture. We have this project, one where we did a lot of publicity, because big toys for big boys, is the mining truck in South Africa, this huge mining truck. So this one, Engie is providing the hydrogen to fuel the truck. So it's producing the hydrogen on site in the mine. So very rough environment, and it's a lot of learning for us for the whole chain, from electricity supply until the hydrogen filling in the tank of the truck. So that's covered by Engie. Then we have this project we just signed, and we're starting realization. It's to supply hydrogen in an ammonia plant in Australia, in the Pilbara. So that's also a lot of learnings for Engie, since it's nearly off-grid. It means that we're running electrolyzer like it will be run probably when we go to the gigawatt scale. It's running in an area with very good renewable and very nothing in terms of infrastructure. So you don't have the network to support the variation in the intermittency of the electricity. And no, you really have to rely on yourself to make run the whole show. From we install the renewable solar panels, the battery to cover the gaps in production in renewable, the electrolyzer, and then the injection in the ammonia plant from Yara, our partner. So yes, we have several projects. We also have ammonia project, methanol project all around the world. Yes.
So there seems to be, there's no limit, I guess. We've had others on the show as well when we talk about new deployment, and it's nothing new, but there are coming more and more areas where deployment. You mentioned aircraft. We've seen in transport, we've seen in industrial, etc., etc. I think Goldman Sachs. Okay, I'm not a big fan of all these reports that comes out because someone paid them, but at least they're looking at something around moving today from a total market cap of, what is it, 125 billion to $1 trillion, whatever it was in the X amount of year. The hydrogen will be the next big one of the big one in this energy transformation. But one of the things that I wonder is, that's on paper, so it sounds good, and we have the applications. But where do you see, is it feasible? Can we produce? Can we distribute? Is the infrastructure there to actually take it to the scale? And if not, where do you see kind of the gates where we see the challenges in terms of, because this is not a small little growth. This is substantial growth, and that's usually comes with challenges.
That's a good point. Actually, like mentioned, we are like in the renewables in the very early 2000s. The world started to take notice. They understand that we have no choice. We have to go towards sustainable hydrogen because it's the basics of our economy, which is an hydrocarbon-based economy. Hydrogen and carbon. So hydrogen with carbon capture we have no choice. We have to use it for a lot of our space if we are serious about decarbonization. So he reached, the politician understood that, the IPCC report may change the mentality. Now we have this strong hit in the energy market, mostly in Europe.
Yeah.
That changed the mind. But we are at a point exactly where the technology looks ready. So it's not fantasy anymore. The technology is ready. Actually, it's 100 years that electrolysis is running in large scale. The first fertilizer plant was based on electrolysis 100 years ago. We just stopped because we had cheap gas. So we say, oh, it's cheaper to do it with gas than with electrolysis. But no, it's restarting. And the technology is ready in terms of production, carbon capture on SMR. It's ready. We can do it. We can do electrolysis. There's no problem. We can do renewable electricity to a very cheap price in some region of the world to feed this huge industry. So that's not a problem anymore. So now the problem is to drive down the cost first for the equipment production. And just to give an idea, we say driving down the cost, it means a lot of money to create a scale effect in the industry. And some quick calculation we did, it's okay, we want 40 gigawatt in Europe of electrolyzer by 2030 and 40 gigawatt outside Europe to feed Europe. That's 80 gigawatt. Okay, that's a rule of thumb, 80 billion to install them at today's price. So if we don't consider a cost decrease in the meantime, 80 billion, wow, that's huge. But then you compare it, Europe, before the pandemic, just for crude oil, in 1 year, spent 300 billion. So Europe spent about four to five times that money in 1 year just to import crude oil. That doesn't count with natural gas, not counted in, just crude oil. So it's to say, it's not such a big step forward. Yes, it's some money. We have to find it. It's probably going to impact the taxpayer in a way, or the consumer. If we want in the European way, it's more the consumer will have to pay. So you have the choice. You can consume less, take less the plane, for example. But the money, it's possible. It's not an amount of money which is incredible to gather. So the first step is really this massification of the demand, and we are on the right way. This 9 billion in the US, which probably will be extended later on. This quota we will create in Europe, which will force the consumer to pay the price for a small amount at the beginning. So like, I don't know, 5, 10, 20% of the consumption will have to be green. That means an increase of their price by maybe 10, 20% for some element. But the money will be there, and the massification will come between now and 2030 in terms of production assets. No, the really big hurdle, it's really fixing, actually it's not a question of investment, it's a question of fixing the regulation. Because everyone, and mainly now that we see the end of the tunnel, everyone is just depending there and ready to sign some huge contract to develop hundreds of megawatts of electrolysis, but you just can't sign. Because when you don't know exactly the rule of the game, you can't finalize your business model precisely, and then there is too much uncertainty, you don't sign. So it's really regulation. It's not investment, it's really regulation first of all. Once regulation will be there, market will be there, and investment will come. Because when there is a market, there is profit, investment is there. Then the second problem, if you want to really go really large scale and to go really cheap, meaning targeting the place where renewable electricity is really cheap, you have to go for infrastructure. And infrastructure here is, their investment is really, really lacking. It's not only a question of putting money again, it's a question of NIMBY factor, it's a question of time horizon. Only a state, at least the way we see it in Europe, only a state, a national state can develop a large-scale infrastructure that will be required, like was required for electricity, high voltage, or like was required for natural gas. You need the support of the state, because it's 10-year, 15-year plan. It's mainly in Europe, very difficult permitting process, a lot of hurdle to overcome, a lot of national policy. Each time you have to cross the border of a state, probably in the US the same. Each time you have to pass from one state to the other, and different regulations are exactly the same. Interests of the different states are not exactly compatible. So it's really infrastructure which is really behind in terms of vision and planning for investment.
You talked about the economics, and you basically said, okay, the economics aren't so great. The consumer is going to pay one way or the other, whether it's taxation or whether they pay based on consumption model, whatever you say. Then you went on to say policy needs to support it. So we started the interview talking about a few initiatives showing some policy leaning the right direction. You're saying you want the nation state to do that. I guess on the actual technical side, though, a couple things that probably fall within in your wheelhouse is, so let's assume those things get worked out over time, or if their desire is there to do it. What things like storage and transport, you talked about infrastructure, right? And to me, the things are, well, where do I produce this green hydrogen, or where are those assets at? And if you mentioned a mine somewhere kind of remote, you're producing some green hydrogen there, and then you talked about some other things. So maybe cover those things next. Is what's the philosophy that you guys have on, do we store this stuff? Do we produce it locally? How do we transport it? Those kind of questions.
It's a question of the environment, what you want to do with it, and where you want to use it. You have to know that if I start by the beginning, for example, in our side in renewable hydrogen production, in green hydrogen production, if you put a solar panel in the Netherlands or Belgium, where I'm seated, or if you put it in North Africa, for the same solar panel, you can produce 3 times more electricity in the north of Africa. So where do you produce it? Ideally, where renewable energy is extremely cheap. So for us in Europe, for example, if you take the European case, if you need the hydrogen molecule itself, because hydrogen molecule is very hard to store, you can store it for a few hours. If you have a plant consuming hydrogen, or a refueling station consuming hydrogen, you can store hydrogen on this refueling station or next to your plant for a few hours of consumption, maybe a few days. If you have salt cavern, like we have for the natural gas in Europe, maybe a week. You can cover your consumption of a week, not more, really. Renewable hydrogen gaseous form is super hard to store. So you have to either produce it locally, just next to you, and in a stable way. So that means in Europe, you have some places which are strategic, where you have this very good renewable, or we can do it in nuclear if you have it cheap enough, because that's baseload. The Netherlands, we have project also, for example, Engie in Portugal, because these are a really good place for renewables. Then the next step, if you really want to massify outside of this strategic pocket, for Europe, for example, you have to import it from region with very, very good renewable. That means developing infrastructure if you want to import it gases, like pipelines. It's the only good infrastructure to transport a very huge amount of hydrogen. But through whole Europe, if you want to feed today's industry of ammonia production, chemical production in Europe, you need to do a full pipeline network from the north of Africa to Germany. So that's the next step in terms of massification of production and transport. Then if you want to go even further afield, or if you want to distribute it and store it for long term, then you have to go liquid hydrogen, like we went for LNG, for example, for the natural gas to make really a worldwide market. Or you have to go toward hydrocarbon, like did the nature, Mother Nature.
But isn't liquid expensive in terms of energy to produce? I think when we've talked before, we talked about this. It needs to be very cold, and there's an inherent amount of energy used to liquefy hydrogen. Yes,
that's the thing. It's about, I would say, 20% more energy to liquefy the hydrogen. To produce it and then liquefy it, you need 20% more energy. So yes, it's a lot of energy. But if you do it in a country where energy is cheap, and for example, 3 times cheaper than in Europe, it totally makes sense, because you increase your consumption energy by 20%. Let's say you have, after the loss on the transport and all that, because you have to burn some of this hydrogen to move the ship, for example. So even if it's 30% or 40% more expensive to import it in liquid, then it's still cheaper than producing it locally. So it's all a question of environment and conditions. So liquid hydrogen makes sense. It's the same for the carbon capture and usage. When you link your hydrogen with CO2 that you capture, either from industry, either from biomass, either by direct air capture, like we are studying already for preparing the really, really sustainable carbon cycle. It's the same. You lose part of the efficiency, but nevertheless, you can produce it in a region where electricity production is such cheaper than in other that it makes sense to transport, to improve the transport and to create the molecules there. So yes, storing gaseous hydrogen, it's better than electricity because you can go at least to a few days of your consumption, but it's still really hard. So to really store it for long term, where I speak about weeks or months, you have to go toward liquid or toward really carbon capture and recreating hydrocarbons.
So one of the things we've had, I think, on the show as a red thread throughout is that we see a lot of new technologies. We see the mix between new technologies and old technologies. But what we're also seeing is the growth of networks, like almost like the ecosystems around this. Call it partnerships, call it ecosystem, because one can probably not do. Usually you had one big plant and you can do it all, but now you see more and more combination. How do you see that in terms of the partners that you're working with, the ecosystem that you're in?
But spot on my new role, partnership and partnership development for Engie.
Oh, perfect.
Spot on.
Huh?
It totally depends on the position of your industry. As is Engie, we are mostly at the moment on the renewable side. We are used to operate large assets, usually for doing gas to power. Now we are doing power to gas, it's just reverse. But it's managing basically the electrical market in one hand and the feedstock market on the other hand. So this is really our DNA in Engie. And so we are an integrator of existing technologies. For example, in Engie also, that's good to know. We don't really develop our own equipment in Engie. We always been an integrator, thinking that competition do its job mostly on this kind, on equipment side. So how we structure the industry, I don't have a crystal ball, but what we see is that really everyone will bring his own brick. For example, Engie's competence in developing renewable assets in the best region, best condition, and to manage the electrical market around, or the electrical stability of huge plants running, electrochemical plants, which have to manage this intermittency of production. Then we also play our role as integrator of partner technologies. So partner who bring the technology to do the electrolysis itself, to do the carbon capture, to do the conversion, I would say power to X, or more like gas to X, when it comes to CO2 and the hydrogen gas, transform it in the next molecule, which can be, like we say, kerosene, which can be diesel, which can be fertilizer with nitrogen, which can be chemicals for your for all industry, plastic industry. So then we did partnership too. And then there will be others. There will be the partners for the transport of these molecules, mainly at the beginning, which will not be like at the beginning transporting some of these green molecules will not be a commoditized market with ready-made infrastructure everywhere. So we probably have to build partnership project specific. So everyone will play. Is actually a lot of players are already existing in the fossil industry, and they will have to adapt the business model and adapt their maybe partly their infrastructure to just do the same job but for renewable and sustainable molecules. So, and one big adaptation for that, it's work and manage the intermittency. So that's really a big change for the industry.
When you talked about adaptation, you mentioned earlier about salt caverns in Europe as a way to store LNG or hydrogen, right? I think it's the way I understood, unless I misunderstood. So what kind of adaptation would you do? And I know from our previous conversations, you do partnerships there and you work with folks. Does an LNG storage facility work well for hydrogen, or is there actually something that needs to happen for these caverns to be changed other than changing the gas?
You always need to adapt the infrastructure around. The salt cavern itself is working for hydrogen. There is we are assessing at the moment how much contamination this brings to the hydrogen gas, because when you produce hydrogen by electrolysis, it's extremely pure, and when you want it in your fuel cell after to move your bus or your truck, you want it extremely pure. So we're checking a bit what impurity seep into the gas in this salt cavern. We have this hipster project in Engie in France, which is actually a project financed by European Union also. And so this is working. What you need to change is mainly the wellhead, because natural gas, it's a much bigger molecule, methane, than hydrogen. So it's all the sealant, sealing system, pumping system. These have to be adapted. But it's minor compared to the price, building the salt cavern, the shaft, or the mechanical infrastructure around. And, so it's a minor investment. Where the investment could be bigger is clearly in a pipeline and for the transport. Because pipeline is steel pipeline is used for natural gas and not ready-made for hydrogen. You may need some coating, or you may need to replace some parts. So that's not ready-made.
Is there, if we talk about energy security in the current world and current attack on pipeline, Nord Stream pipeline and others, so pipeline sounds less exciting at the moment if you're talking about energy security. If you're telling me you're going to produce this stuff in a nice sunny part of Spain and then you're going to pipe it all around Europe, aren't we going to be in the same place we are today, potentially with hydrogen in the future if we do this?
I start by telling that there is sweet spots around Europe. So there is sweet spots where we will produce locally hydrogen, and this is strategic. It's not only a question of economics, and good that you point on it. Lots of these projects in Europe, if you do technical economics, pure analysis, it makes sense for a very short term, like 5-10 years, because indeed there will be no much competition from time to put infrastructure in place and the transport in place. There will be no much competition. But on the very long run, it's true, Europe is a hard place for energy. There will be the competition with the electrical market, which will be demanding this electricity and probably pay really well for it. So yes, from a strategic point of view, it makes total sense to develop this hydrogen project in sweet spot in Europe, like the Netherlands, like I mentioned, like hydropower in Switzerland, like wind generation also in Scotland and UK. So Spain, Portugal, there is sweet spot, strategic spot, totally made sense. And then after the advantage, yes, pipeline, you can always sabotage any kind of infrastructure. So I'm not going to enter that debate. But the point is you can diversify a lot of sources. Renewable energy is not like gas or oil. It's not a deposit, but it's a bit similar. It's where the resource is extremely diverse. If you take hydro, wind, solar, maybe cheap nuclear in the future, you can produce this hydrogen in many different regions, and therefore you can increase tremendously your security of supply. Because if one route is cut, if there is instability in one region, you can count on many others.
Cool. I think this is probably the interesting, one of the more interesting things, as you said, because there are sweet spots and they're divided across rather than having secluded areas that has all of it. So I think that's quite interesting. I know we're coming up to time, but I still have thousands of more questions, but I'll try to wrap it down to a short one. But one of the things, we looked at the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and this is, and hydrogen will be a big part of all this. But do you see a little bit of a fight between, because there's a big investment, governments or cities comes in and do this, and we see the rise of nuclear discussions across Europe as well, and do you see that there's a little bit of fight now who's going to take the money, or is it that there is a dedicated money for hydrogen specifically? I don't have all the details, but how does that work? Sorry?
Speaking about the IRA?
Yeah, and in general as well, you know, everyone's going to do the energy transition, so we need to become independent of fossil fuels. And you see in Europe, the strategy is quite different in terms of how to approach it.
I can't tell you because the fine print are not there in the IRA as in the European regulation. Seeing the amount of money proposed, we don't think it will be a fight for this money at the beginning, but at least it will help to really kickstart large-scale projects in the US. What will be the fight after is more, actually it's such a good support in the US that producing in US for other part of the world makes a lot of sense too. So I have to see how that evolves. That's more like that I see it between Europe and US. Europe is creating a market by putting quota. US is creating a production capacity by putting subsidy to production. So it makes a perfect transfer funnel between US and Europe. So we'll see how that play out in the regulation. I'm not sure US would be happy to subsidize green economy in Europe, and I'm not sure Europe would be happy to see all this production capacity running away in US.
No.
So let's see what happens. That would be interesting.
No, thank you.
Well, fantastic. I think it's been a fun conversation, a journey. I'd love to spend more time, but I think we're pressing up against time constraints here. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks.
For our audience, you've enjoyed another episode of Insider's Guide to Energy. If you enjoyed this content, please share this content, subscribe, like it, add comments. Don't forget to join us live at the end of October here in Houston, Texas. If you're a student, we have free passes to Energy Trading Week, and we have a live student event going to be taking place there. We'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.